What is good, my beautiful people? Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be the last beginner tutorial with respect to ProRes Raw and DaVinci Resolve. After this, we're going to start working on some more advanced stuff. Today, we're going to be talking about how to work in HDR with color management using ProRes Raw footage converted to CinemaDNG in DaVinci Resolve. I'm also going to show you guys a couple adjustments that you need to be aware of in the Camera Raw tab before you start actually setting up your node tree for your color grade, and a simple node structure that I like to use to begin my color grading process as well. Now, teaching HDR on YouTube presents a unique challenge because my graphical user interface is in standard dynamic range, but that doesn't allow you to view the footage properly. Don't worry, I have a workaround that'll get us close enough so that you understand what we are doing today. I'm also going to give you guys a quick rundown on the extra hardware you will need to get a clean feed to your HDR capable reference display. Now, before we get started, I want to take a quick opportunity to mention a color grading education program I've created called ColoristHQ. I created ColoristHQ to address my issues that I had with common ways of learning online and traditional online courses. I originally taught a downloadable DaVinci Resolve color grading course, but there was two problems with that. One, I didn't get feedback from you guys, and two, it didn't allow me to grow with my students. So I started teaching live color grading education. I would set up a class live every month. People would sign up for a specific month, and that really allowed me to get the user feedback. But I found myself changing 3 or 4 months down the road and not being able to impart that knowledge onto my past students. Hence, I wasn't able to grow with you guys, which is why I created ColoristHQ, which is more subscription-based with respect to education. We focus on a topic per month. Sometimes we dive in and I watch your color grading process and give you critiques, but it's a monthly setup where every other week on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you guys join me in a live online classroom and we go through some color grading education. This allows me to grow with you guys, and this allows me to get user feedback in addition for you to pace yourself for how long you want to be in the program, subscription-based. It also allows me to price it much more economically. I don't know about you guys, but I've seen the price of eggs, and I can't bring myself to charge $1,500 for an education program. I want to be the person that I needed when I started learning. If you guys would like to know more, be sure to check out the link www.citybickergreen.com/ColoristHQ. It should pop up top, and it's in the description down below. So let's go ahead and talk about the additional hardware that you're going to need to get a proper image on your display. The biggest thing that we need to do is bypass our computer's color management. This means that we can't simply plug in an SDI cord or an HDMI cord into our computer's graphics card and then into our display. No, that's going to mix in the computer's color management system. We need to bypass this, right? So we're going to need an I/O device, something like a Blackmagic Design DeckLink card or a Blackmagic Design Studio interface. Now, I personally recommend the Blackmagic Design DeckLink card for those who are on Windows and on Mac. The only thing is with on Mac, you're going to need an external enclosure. This is simply a card that goes in the PCIe Express card slot of your motherboard on your desktop. If you are on a Windows laptop, of course, you're also going to need an external graphics card enclosure as well, in addition to anything on the Mac side. The reason I recommend this on the Mac side and just overall for mobile laptops as well is because of the price to performance ratio. DeckLink cards are cross-compatible with Premiere Pro, and it's much cheaper to get an external GPU enclosure and a DeckLink card and use a USB 3 connection than it is to invest in a Blackmagic Design Studio setup. That being said, you can also use the Blackmagic Design Studio setup as well. Once you do that, you simply plug in your HDMI cord or your SDI cord into the back of the DeckLink card or the Blackmagic Design Studio interface, and then you can route it to your mastering display. This is going to give you a clean feed into Resolve. I'm going to show you in a second how we set that up in Resolve as well, so that we are actually viewing what's on our graphical user interface, as you can see back there on the reference display. Outside of that, we're going to want to make sure that we have an HDR capable display, as well as one that is color accurate. I made a video talking about displays down below. Go ahead and watch it after you've watched this video if you need some more information. With that quick bit of information, let's go ahead and hop into DaVinci Resolve. Now that we're in Resolve, the first thing that we want to do, especially if we are setting up our DeckLink card for the first time, is go into DaVinci Resolve and Preferences. From there, we're going to go to the Video and Audio I/O menu. And in Video I/O, you want to make sure that your monitoring device that you chose, whether it's the DeckLink card, which is the Mini Monitor 4K, that's what I use, or the Blackmagic Design Studio interface, that you have that selected here. Once that is selected and you plug in your HDMI or your SDI cable into your display and the card or the interface, you're going to see just the image that's displayed on our graphical user interface right here. The next thing that we're going to do in order to properly set up our HDR timeline is going to happen in the Project Settings tab. So go ahead and go to File and Project Settings with me. And let's go ahead and first hop into our Camera Raw tab. We need to select CinemaDNG. And when it comes to decode using, go ahead and select Project with me. And then for color space and gamma, select Blackmagic Design and Blackmagic Design Film. Now, also make sure that you have Apply Pretone Curve and Soft Clip unchecked. We're going to go ahead and save that. And I want you to see the change that happens here. Well, generally it happens, but if it does not, we can go ahead and change it ourselves. This should actually convert all of our footage into our timeline, as you can see here, into Blackmagic Design Film. So when we drag it on the timeline now, it should be in that case right there, as you can see. It just made me look a little crazy in the beginning. Now we need to change our color management tab. So we're going to go back into File, Project Settings. You do not have to save your Camera Raw adjustment first before you go into color management. I just did it so you can see the changes. And the first thing we're going to change is our color science. We want to select DaVinci Resolve, YRGB color managed. And from there, we're going to untick automatic color management. Go ahead and select custom. Now for our input color space, we're going to scroll all the way to the top and select same as timeline. That's because raw footage can be debayered in the NLE to any working color space. That's the beauty of raw. So we're going to go ahead and leave that as same as timeline. For our timeline color space, we have two options. We have DaVinci Wide Gamut, or we have Rec 2020 Intermediate. Two things to note. With the DaVinci Wide Gamut, you're going to lean more to the green side with respect to color temperature. Furthermore, you're going to need to decrease midtone detail a little bit less as the footage is not as harsh. However, I find the results from Rec 2020 Intermediate to be more pleasing. I do have to make bigger adjustments with respect to midtone detail, and I do lean a little bit more magenta in the beginning, but that's something that we can go ahead and correct. This is my recommended setting for our timeline color space. With respect to output color space, this is going to be dependent on what your mastering display is calibrated to. There's two options for HDR. That's going to be P3 D65 ST2084 at 1000 nits or Rec 2020 ST2084 at 1000 nits. I think I said ST2084 for P3. Not sure, but it's ST2084. Stim C. We're going to go ahead and select that because that is what my display is calibrated to. And I'm going to enable Dolby Vision for the purposes of this tutorial, and I'm going to use it in a unconventional way to show you guys exactly what I'm doing in Resolve. And you'll see why in just a second. We're also going to select HDR10 so that we have that option for our metadata there as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and select Save. Now everything looks proper now on my reference display, my mastering display, but you can see here that it still looks like we're shooting in log on our graphical user interface. That's going to be the biggest thing that you notice. But this makes sense because if you have an understanding of how a log gamma curve works, log footage is actually HDR footage. So what I'm going to do for the purposes of today's tutorial is I am going to use Dolby Vision, and I am going to go ahead and create and analyze a frame here real quick so that I can give you an SDR preview of what is going on. Now, keep in mind, this is not a way to grade HDR. I'm just allowing you to see right now what I'm doing instead of you looking at me grading a log image. So here we are. Let's go ahead and go into our Camera Raw tab right now. The first thing that we need to do is set ourselves up to create a clean palette before we even get into our node tree. So what's the first step? Let's just work our way down correctly through each column. The first thing that I like to do is I like to balance out my image. And when I'm balancing out my image, I'm going to be balancing for skin tones. I'm also trying to get my whites and blacks as close as possible to neutral. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to bring down that color temperature, which I believe in camera, I actually shot it at 3500, which looks like it would be correct. So I'm going to leave it right about there. That's looking pretty good to me. Now, this was supposed to be more of a tungsten lighting scenario. Above him, it was supposed to be more warm. So I can also warm that up if that's something I want to do, leaving it right about there, giving more of a warm feel on the whites there too. Again, we're lighting with color, so our color separation really isn't too much of an issue. This one's going to be up to personal preference. We can always go back and change this later. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to adjust my tint just a little bit, because I felt like I was a little too much on that magenta side. And I do want my skin tones to be touching roughly at the top of that line. Again, I'm going off of my views here. Now, the one thing that you can do with RAW is leave a lot of your exposure decisions to post-production. Really, when you're recording raw data, you need to look at it as capturing as much information with respect to dynamic range in the scene while keeping your ratios correct, and then you can go in and properly relight in post. One of the ways that you can see how much range you have in your image is by bringing your highlights all the way down and bringing them back up. And then for our shadows to see how much range we have, we can adjust our shadows to the max. Then we can go ahead and crush them as well. And then we have an idea. Now, personally, I like where my ratios are. I'm not going to really adjust anything here. But the one thing I will do is I will bring my mid-tone detail down. And I'm not afraid of this tool. I generally bring it down to around 35 or 50. And there's some cases where we need to bring it down to 50. Why? Because I find that ProRes Raw tends to have very, very harsh mid-tone detail for some reason when using the raw converter. Let me give you another example. Let me switch over to this clip right here, and you will see exactly what I mean. So we're going to go ahead and analyze this. And I'm going to go ahead and make those same adjustments that we just made. So I'm going to go ahead and go over into clip. I'm going to bring my highlights down to recover all that detail that I have here. I'm going to go ahead and bring my exposure up just a smidge. And let's just say that I'm good right about there, right? Now, I want you to see the difference between her skin tone. Right now, this is feeling very, very harsh to me, especially when I look at it in my HDR reference display. So if we come in to 200%, we can kind of see what I mean by that. We have just this glow on certain parts of the skin, and there's really no reason for that because the talent had on makeup and generally in camera processing wouldn't cause that issue with us. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to be generous with bringing down that mid-tone detail. And to me, this gives me a much better feel with respect to the skin and what we usually expect with a filmic look out of our raw curve. Our log curve. I hate the word filmic, but we're gonna use it today here. And just take a difference between that right there. Look at that. You see it once we take it away. It just makes the image a little bit more pleasing. So that's one thing to note with respect to mid-tone detail. So looking at our image here, I feel like we're doing good. I do not generally touch the lift, gain, or contrast wheels because I find that I have more control in our node tree unless I really, really, really want to set in a darker tone in the very beginning. I can also do that in the node tree. Or if I really want to try to recover a black point just a little bit and make it softer, I can also do that here. But again, these are things we have more control of in the node tree. So let me talk about my node tree basics here. I do 3 nodes in the very beginning. We're going to do 1, 2, and 3 serial nodes. Our first node is going to be noise reduction. You can copy this as well. We're always generally going to need to denoise our raw footage. It's a raw signal. There's no processing done to it. So what I would normally do in this case is I would come into noise reduction, select 3 frames, better, probably around 15 or 16, and then go ahead and turn it off. That way it's not bogging down my performance. I'll turn it back on at the end. We can see a need to do this here in our footage. If we zoom into 200, we can see a little bit of that digital noise creeping in. So let's come back over here, and now we see where the benefit of this is. We'll go into our denoise. And we can see how that makes a difference right there. So that is the reason why we are going to do that. The second thing that we're going to do is after we denoise, I always like to sharpen the signal that's coming in. So we'll call this sharpening. We're not going to do that right now. And then the next node that I have is we're just going to call this a skin tone node for our skin tone key if we need to make one. From there, I'm going to go ahead and add one more serial, and then I'm going to add 3 parallel nodes. And what we're going to do in these parallel nodes is we're going to call this one shadows. We're going to call this one midtones, or mids for short, and we're going to call this one highlights. And I will allow myself to make 1 or 2 adjustments per node here using my primaries or my HDR wheels. So if we are going to work with our primaries, the next tip I'm going to give you is to understand that you can't just go into your regular color primaries and start fiddling around. You have to put them into a linear mode. To do that, we're going to go ahead and turn these nodes into HDR nodes. And this is going to allow us to use our primaries more effectively when it comes to adjusting our midtones and our shadows and our highlights. Now, I will say that lift gamma gain in this configuration does tend to feel more like you're working with shadows, midtones, and highlights. But keep in mind that things like gain, you will affect the entire range of the image if you make a change. And as you can see here, although I'm working in gain, I'm still affecting my green. So just keep that in mind as well. If you would like to make a particular adjustment to say something like the shadows or highlights, this is where you can go in and use your HDR wheels, and you can go ahead and select just that light portion. Now, this is a very dark scene. We're on the darker side. Let's see. We would probably be around, I would say, probably 100 nits in this scene is where I actually shot it at 150. But we can go ahead and select our light region or our shadow region or our dark region and make adjustments in each one of those corresponding areas. Those are the things I feel like you really need to know when it comes to working in HDR in the very beginning. From there, we can go ahead and continue to build out our node tree, creating our look as normal. But I'm going to be honest with you guys, for this scene, I really didn't do too much after it because we went ahead and lit with color and already had our color science built in. Just one more quick note. Remember, you cannot work in a Dolby Vision preview if you are trying to color grade in HDR. This is more so to view your work. We would make all of these adjustments looking at our reference display, and then once we're done with our grade, we'll go ahead, we'll analyze frame, and then look at our preview. Now, one more quick tip that I'm going to give you guys is going to be on exports. Now, this is going to be with HDR10. Once you have your timeline all completed, you're going to want to make sure that you go into your color tab and you analyze your current frames actually not analyze current frames, go ahead and analyze all shots before you go ahead and export your project, especially if you're working on a platform like YouTube that's HDR10 capable, or you're working on a platform that's Dolby Vision capable, right? Why? Well, if we go ahead, let's just go ahead and analyze just this frame. We'd normally do all shots, but let's just do this frame, right? Remember, HDR10 is just a preview right now in Resolve. It's not a full implementation. And we go ahead to our deliver tab. First things first is that in order to deliver to something like YouTube or Vimeo in HDR10, we're going to need to go ahead and work in an H.265 file format. And our encoding profile needs to be in 10-bit. That's the big key. We're going to want to embed the HDR10 metadata. Also, if you're going to internet, make sure you select network optimization, and then go ahead and make sure that your color space and gamma tags are whatever you worked in. So that's going to be Rec 2020, and that's going to be ST 2084. That is going to be the first key for anything like Vimeo with HDR10 or YouTube. However, if we are going to go to something like Netflix, or if we're going to go to something like Disney or Sony Pictures, we need to create an IMF package. And then we can see here that if we go ahead and go into Netflix, it makes sure that all of our stuff is taken care of. So we really can't change any settings here, but this is where we would be able to embed our Dolby Vision metadata as well. The studio is currently working on getting Dolby Vision licensing, so we have the full support of it, but those are just things to keep in mind for that. You want to make sure you do that process, then it embeds and everything is taken care of for you. Let's go ahead and conclude our session. If you guys have any questions at all, be sure to leave a comment down below or shoot me a DM on social media. I'm always available there. And if you want a little bit more color grading education, go ahead and check out ColoristHQ. Be sure to give me a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and turn on those post notifications if you have not. Follow me and the YouTube fam on social media. The links are in the description down below. And now more than ever, my beautiful people, if you are ever feeling uninspired, uncreative, or just want to give up on life. Every day, airplanes take off against the wind. Keep climbing, stay inspired, and as always, stay fabulous. I'm Sydney. We'll see you beautiful people next time. Peace out.